Dr. Sarah Ortiz was 30,000 feet in the air when the passenger next to her started dying. With no medical equipment and turbulence shaking the plane, her blue eyes focused on performing surgery with a dinner knife. Flight 847 to London was supposed to be Sarah's first vacation in 3 years. The blonde surgeon had finally decided to take a break from Metropolitan General's demanding schedule, booking a window seat where she could watch the Atlantic Ocean pass beneath them while sipping wine and reading a novel. But medicine had a way of finding her, even at cruising altitude. The man in seat 14B introduced himself as Robert Chen, a businessman heading to a conference, had seemed perfectly healthy when they boarded. Middle-aged, well-dressed, chatting pleasantly about his work in international finance. Sarah had politely deflected his attempts at conversation, eager to disconnect from her medical life for just a few hours. That peace shattered 2 hours into the flight when Robert suddenly grabbed his chest and doubled over in agony. "Help me," he gasped, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. "Can't breathe." Sarah's vacation mode evaporated instantly. Her piercing blue eyes assessed the situation with clinical precision as her hands moved to check Robert's pulse, rapid, irregular, and weakening by the second. "I'm a doctor," she announced to the flight attendant who rushed over. "This man is having a cardiac event, possibly a massive heart attack." But this was just the beginning of an impossible medical challenge. The flight crew immediately made an announcement asking if there were any doctors on board, and Sarah identified herself as a cardiac surgeon. The senior flight attendant, Maria Santos, quickly brought the plane's medical kit, a basic collection of supplies that seemed woefully inadequate for what Sarah suspected was happening. "His pulse is dropping," Sarah observed, her fingers pressed to Robert's neck. "I need you to ask the captain about the nearest airport for emergency landing." But as she examined Robert more closely, her experienced hands detected something that made her blood run cold. The rigidity in his abdomen, the specific pattern of his pain. This wasn't just a heart attack. Robert Chen was suffering from a ruptured aortic aneurysm, a catastrophic tearing of the body's largest blood vessel. Without immediate surgery, he would bleed to death internally within minutes. And they were still 4 hours from London. "Ma'am, the captain says the nearest airport is 2 hours away," Maria reported, her voice tight with concern. Sarah looked at Robert's increasingly pale face, then at the cramped airplane aisle filled with concerned passengers. Everything in her medical training screamed that what she was considering was impossible, dangerous, and potentially lawsuit-worthy. But sometimes impossible was the only option left. "I need you to clear the galley area and get me every sharp object you can find," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "Kitchen knives, scissors, anything with a blade. And I need the strongest alcohol you have on board." Maria stared at her in shock. "Ma'am, you can't be serious about—" "This man has a ruptured blood vessel in his abdomen," Sarah interrupted, her blue eyes blazing with determination. "If I don't operate right now, he'll die before we can land anywhere. Get me what I need." The next few minutes were a blur of frantic preparation. Sarah directed the flight crew to fashion an operating table using food service carts, while passengers donated seat cushions for padding. A pediatric nurse traveling with her family assisted with basic medical support, while an off-duty EMT helped clear the area and control the growing crowd of onlookers. Sarah sterilized a sharp carving knife with vodka and flame from the galley stove, her hands steady despite the plane's occasional turbulence. She had performed thousands of surgeries, but never at 30,000 feet with improvised tools and an audience of terrified passengers. "Robert, can you hear me?" she asked, leaning close to her patient. "I'm going to help you, but this is going to hurt." His eyes, glassy with pain and blood loss, focused on her face. You're going to operate here?" "I have to," Sarah replied honestly. "Trust me." Using techniques she had learned in medical school but never imagined applying in such circumstances, Sarah began the most challenging surgery of her career. The improvised knife moved with practiced precision as she opened Robert's abdomen, searching for the source of the internal bleeding while the plane shook around them. What happened next would test every skill she had ever learned. Blood welled up from the incision, and Sarah could see the torn aorta pumping Robert's life away with each heartbeat. Working by overhead cabin lighting and the flashlights of passenger cell phones, she identified the rupture and began the delicate work of clamping off blood flow. "I need pressure here," she called to the nurse, guiding the woman's hands to critical spots. "And someone find me thread, dental floss, sewing kit, anything I can use for sutures." The turbulence hit just as Sarah was attempting to repair the torn blood vessel. The plane dropped suddenly, throwing everyone against the ceiling before slamming back down. Sarah's hands never stopped working, her surgeon's instincts keeping her focused even as chaos erupted around her. "Hold him steady," she shouted over the screams of frightened passengers. Blood splattered across her vacation clothes as she fought to save a stranger's life in the most unlikely operating room imaginable. For 45 minutes, Sarah performed surgery that seemed to defy physics and medical possibility. Using a dinner knife, dental floss, and sheer determination, she repaired Robert Chen's ruptured aorta while flying through international airspace. When the bleeding finally stopped and Robert's pulse strengthened, a cheer erupted from the passengers who had watched the entire procedure in stunned silence. Sarah collapsed into a nearby seat, her blonde hair disheveled, her blue eyes exhausted but triumphant. Robert Chen survived. When they landed in London 2 hours later, paramedics were amazed to find a patient who should have been dead, but was instead stable and conscious, thanks to surgery performed with kitchen utensils at cruising altitude. The story made international headlines within hours. "Surgeon saves life with dinner knife at 30,000 feet" became the lead story on every major news network. Sarah's impromptu surgery was called everything from miraculous to medically impossible, with aviation and medical experts debating whether such a procedure could actually succeed. But for Sarah Ortiz, the blonde surgeon with piercing blue eyes who had never backed down from a challenge, it was simply what any doctor would do when faced with a dying patient, regardless of the location or circumstances. Later, as she sat in a London hospital watching Robert Chen recover fully from his ordeal, Sarah realized that some vacations were worth canceling. Sometimes being a doctor meant being ready to save lives anywhere, anytime, even when your operating room was an airplane aisle and your surgical instruments came from the galley kitchen. The risk-taking surgeon had just redefined what it meant to practice medicine without limits. Sarah Ortiz's airborne surgery proves that true medical heroes don't need perfect conditions. They need courage, skill, and an unshakable commitment to saving lives wherever they find them. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary medical moments happen in the most ordinary places. If Dr. Sarah Ortiz's sky-high surgery amazed you, subscribe to the Frontline Voice for more incredible medical adventures. Hit like if you believe doctors are everyday heroes ready to save lives anywhere. Tell us in the comments, would you trust a surgeon to operate on you mid-flight? Share Sarah's story with someone who needs to see what real heroism looks like. Until next time, remember that medicine isn't confined to hospitals. It's wherever healing hands are needed most.